On this episode of Run, Jump, Stomp, a U.S. Senator is introducing some gaming laws.
State of play happened with PlayStation.
Microsoft is making games more accessible.
And they want you to clean up your act.
Those stories and more on this episode of Run, Jump, Stomp. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are listening to this show, and you just heard some other person talking, which usually doesn't happen. It's usually just Bill, but this time I am joined by somebody whose podcast I listened to for a very long time. He is clearly the tallest judge from America's Next Top Podcaster. I say that having only ever seen these people from the shoulders up. So how's it going? That's Scott Johnson.
Hey, it's good to be here, Bill. Thanks for having me. I think, if you put me, Nicole, and Jury in the same room, I will out height them by a good foot or more.
A good foot or more. See, I had no idea how tall Jury was, so I wasn't sure if I should say that.
Yeah, he's a little shorty guy, and that's okay. Like, he's normal. He's average. I have this extendo height problem that gets me in trouble sometimes with, like, movie theaters or, trying to fit in a regular coach airplane seat. It's sort of nightmarish, actually, the things I have to deal with as a tall person. But look, I don't complain. I keep it to myself for the most part. But at the very least, I've now vented it on your show, and I don't have to talk about it for another 8 months.
There you go. So you guys heard it here first. He'll be back in 8 months to talk about how tall he is. Before we get started on the video gaming news, I want to give everybody a chance to get to know Scott. I think that most people who listen to my show probably also know who Scott is. But Scott, why don't you give everyone a rundown of exactly who you are?
Well, I am a human male from planet Earth. I won't go that far back.
Okay.
I am a podcaster and artist, and that's what I do. I'm pretty much a full-time doing what I wanted to do when I was 10 years old. And I figured out a way to do it. I host a myriad of podcasts, 8 or 9 currently in production. And they range from a daily morning show to weekly shows about video games, weekly shows about other kinds of stuff. And I do that all the time. That's kind of my constant gig. I also do a lot of illustration, comic and art, commercial artwork that is both stuff I make for the fan community, things they buy in the store, or sometimes it's just for fun, but it's also for side gigs and other projects. So between those two things, that's pretty much what makes me. And of course, got a family, 3 kids, my wife, a couple dogs, living the life, living the dream.
That's awesome. We're about to talk about video game news. Maybe people want to know, like, what's your history with gaming? Where did you start out video games?
Goes very far back for me. I was, as a kid growing up, I had the cool opportunity to live in a house where we always had video games. And by that, I mean, my dad actually owned and ran multiple arcades in the Valley. And as a result, he was always getting new arcade machines in. So one day we'd have a Cocktail Pac-Man in the house, and the next day we'd get, I don't know, Moon Cresta or Battlezone would show up in the garage or something like that. And these, sort of late 80s, early 90s sort of era coin-op video games were always around the house. They always had free play on, and I was very popular in junior high as a result. I don't think anyone was my real friend, sadly, but we were video game friends at the least. But anyway, that put the seed in me pretty hard, and I was always a fan of technologies and where it intersected with gaming, even in its most early incarnations. Whether that's the Atari 2600 or early NES days or whatever, but I was always fascinated by it as a business, as an industry, and certainly I love playing them. And so that's always sort of been a huge part of the backbone. Like, I've got a lot of things that I do, a lot of diversity in what I cover and talk about and do as a career now, but it all seems to have one big common sort of arterial vein in it. Actually, arteries and veins are separate, so that makes no sense what I just said. But you get my drift, and it's video games. And they've been with me ever since. I've owned every console there was to own. I've played every PC game that mattered. I had every handheld. I have all the current stuff and look forward to whatever's next. It's just always been a part of me. And it probably always will be, as long as I can keep up with the trends, I guess. But yeah, I've a long and storied life with video games just surrounding me all the time.
So Scott was originally going to come on Nintendo Switchcraft, and if you're listening to this and you haven't subscribed to Nintendo Switchcraft, what the hell are you doing? Go subscribe. But when the news dropped that we were getting some loot box legislation happening, I reached out and I said, this might actually be a better conversation. And he said yes, that he wanted to do this instead. So Senator Josh Hawley, I don't know how to say that, Hawley. He's a
Hawley is what I understand, which is a little weird, but Hawley is what I believe happened. Yeah, well, there's the name.
He can pronounce it that way if he wants to, I guess. This guy, he's a Republican out of Missouri, or as the people in Missouri say, Missouri.
Yeah, and or Missouri, depending on how if you like the place or not.
Sure. I went to basic training in Missouri when I was in the Army, and that's how we pronounced it, was Missouri, because it was terrible. But he announced a bill. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are saying that the bill has been introduced. It hasn't actually been introduced. He's just talking about it. He's announcing that he's thinking about doing something about this. And the TLDR of this is that the bill, its objectivity is to ban loot boxes and pay-to-win microtransactions in games that are played by minors. Scott, what's your initial take on this?
My initial take is the same take I have whenever government and or legislators try to get involved in regulation of video games, and that is they always come to it with so little information. So even based on what you just gave as the TLDR, and there's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
But they basically just said, look, we want to ban these outright from any video games a kid plays. Well, I hate to tell them this, but pretty much every kid will play all video games if they want to, if they want to play Fortnite, they're going to play it. If they want to play Overwatch, they're going to play it. So this idea that we have this cordoned off area where just the kids play, to me, is naive. They're coming at that from a really weird angle. And this isn't the first time. It probably won't be the last time, but he strikes me as somebody who doesn't actually understand how video games work. What he's probably got is people, constituents of his, who are barking up that tree and saying, we got to do something about my kid. He spends all his money in Fortnite and all his time there. And this is his gut reaction. That being said, I also think that this is the part where I'm going to agree with him. I think that loot boxes and pay to win and sort of microtransactions in general, not all, but many are kind of crappily implemented in a way that takes advantage of people who maybe have less, straps on their savings, or are a little less inclined to hold back and look at the value of the dollar they're spending. I do think that I wouldn't call it criminal, but I would call it a little skeezy. And it's been that way for a while. Mobile has helped propel that in a pretty major way. But certainly consoles and PCs and developers and publishers have all caught up and glommed on to this idea that this is a way to do a thing. And I don't love it. Here's the other problem, though. This isn't a simple, do you have loot boxes or do you not? Or even, does a kid play your game or does he not? It gets way more complicated than that. At what point is something not a loot box? In other words, if I'm in, I don't know, let's say Diablo, playing Diablo 3, and I get a resplendent chest, at the end of a run. Okay. And I click on that thing and it poops out a bunch of gear and gold. And man, that was awesome, because look at the cool legendary I got. That means I can go up a level in difficulty and go through this again and keep getting more of these chests and open them again and get more gold and more cool loot. And when does it end? It never does, because that's the whole point of the game, right?
Right.
Do they stop shy of that? I mean, I'm not going to pretend I don't know that this is mostly dealing with two factors. One is predatory money grabbing, and kids not having the maturity to contain themselves. Basically, they're trying their best not to say gambling, but that's kind of what they think this is. And I would argue that you really need to understand the depth of the industry, the depth of the genres it contains, before you start throwing legislation at it like spaghetti, because I don't think it'll work. Thirdly, so this is my third and final thought on all of this. or my third and final initial thought, I guess, is that I want the industry itself, and I said this on another show of mine, I want the industry itself to step up the way they did in the 90s and self-regulate in this regard. They also know that some of this stuff is predatory, and they also know that it makes a ton of money, and they've got to come to some kind of conclusion as to what their stance will be it a moral one or a business one or whatever that stance is going to be. The rating system in the 90s came out of the threat of government or regulation, and they figured out a way to do it internally, and it worked, and it was great, and it stands to this day, and nobody's trying to push that anymore from a regulatory standpoint. They self-regulated through that, and they made it work across multiple regions. There's no reason they couldn't come to some agreement here. It's a little more complicated here because it actually goes to their bottom line, and they're dealing with an industry that doesn't deal with inflation the way others do. Other industries, you're like, well, all right, cars were $2,000 in 1975. Same car today is going to cost you $25,000 or more. Video games were $49 10 years ago, and they're still pretty much right around $49, $59 now. They don't have the same rate of inflation. So they are driven and motivated to come up with other streams of revenue so they can continue to grow. And one of those is loot boxes. Others are microtransactions. Some are, selling a premium product and still charging microtransactions on the other end. Again, a kind of skeevy practice on the face of it. But I also understand that these are revenue generators in an industry that doesn't do well with, well, we'll just raise the price of our games because players won't pay it, or there'll be giant backlash. So it's a very hard place I know that they find them in, and I'm not going to pretend to be completely blind to the problem they're facing. But I do think this needs to be a combination of education on the side of this senator and others who may support it, and the industry itself putting measures in that might help take care of it without somebody having to step in.
Yeah, I think that, well, you brought up, well, that was a lot to unpack. First off, the idea of revenue.
Yeah.
In addition to what you just said about how the game prices don't go up with inflation very much, on top of that, making a video game has gotten more and more expensive over time. So, like, we're a long way away from the days when you'd have a team of like 5 or 6 guys make a game for the NES. Now it's like teams of hundreds sometimes that make all of these games, and that alone, if you add that to the fact that the prices of video games today are not multiple hundreds of dollars, it like that price has just kept going down. And yes, I'm not saying that EA is having financial difficulties, far from it, but that idea that they're making a lot of money, yes, they are, but it's not because they're keeping up with inflation. The second thing,
that's
go ahead.
The other way they try to do it is volume to make up for that. And so, they have gigantic advertising budgets and huge PR budgets, and they do all they can to push as hard as they can. And if one little thing goes wrong, like Mortal Kombat facing some of its issues in the last couple of weeks, it can have a real impact on sales. And suddenly you're not in the green, you're very much in the red. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's an important point to know where all that money is being spent. A lot of it is just being spent to make sure that they get as much coverage as possible because there's so much competition. And you and I, if we want, this is a fun dichotomy, because you and I could go into a garage and go make games right now and do really well on Steam if we make cool games. That market, the indie market, certainly on multiple platforms now, is huge, and partially because we live in such a big ecosystem of gaming, from big AAA titles all the way down to one guy in his basement. We can have all of this range, and that part of it's great. Like, I love that. But at the top is where we're having the problem. And that's the stuff that's, getting targeted, and where we probably need to try to find a fix.
Definitely. We definitely do have to find a fix there. You mentioned the 90s, when the ESRB first formed. Actually, Sega tried doing that rating system beforehand. I don't know if you remember this, Scott, but like the Genesis cartridges, they had their own rating system at first, and then it was after Mortal Kombat and Night Trap came out that the government was like, okay, these are violent games and they're impacting our children, and we have to protect our children. And that's the same kind of thing that's happening here. We have to protect our children is the theme of this particular bill. And in the 90s, that forced companies like Nintendo and Sega to work together, where Sega was trying to do something like this and Nintendo was saying, well, we're not going to work with you. We'll just keep clean games. That's why Mortal Kombat didn't have blood on the Super Nintendo without putting in the code.
Mm-hmm.
And by the government getting in there and threatening them, it ended up forcing two companies that did not want to work together to come up with the ESRB. And I think at the end of the day, we're all better off because of it. Even if a lot of times I used to work in a video game store, and parents would come in and they would buy these games that are rated M or, something like that for their little youngling. And, I would always say, well, I don't know if you want to do that. This is a game that is really for grown-ups. And the kid would give me the old hairy eyeball and be mad. And, they'd be mad. And, sometimes the parent just said, oh, I don't care. It's a video game. Video games are for kids. And that's something that I feel like Mr. Hawley might not understand, is that not all video games are for kids. And his idea here that games that are played by minors, that definitely needs a definition. I think
because there's no such thing, in my opinion. There's just, it's minors, it's adults, it's everybody. There's no like weird, he thinks there's some distinction or dividing line, and there really isn't.
Right. Almost like he thinks that you go into a store and you get carded when you go to buy a game, which, that's something that they have said that they wanted in the past, that if you go in to buy an M-rated game that you would get carded, that kind of thing. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. In fact, I kind of like that idea that you would get carded to buy a game that you're not supposed to have when you're a kid. I don't let my kid play certain games.
Mm-hmm.
It all depends on what kind of stuff is in that game. Now, me being a parent who is also somebody who plays video games, I have the wherewithal to understand this is what's in this game and this is what's in that game. But most parents don't have that. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who say there has to be responsibility on the part of the parents when it comes to what games their kid is playing. And I totally agree with that. But if you had asked my parents what games I was playing, they didn't own an arcade business. They would have been like, I don't know. I don't understand these things. My dad still doesn't understand these things. When he calls me when he's having when he gets a text from somebody he doesn't know, and he's like, should I delete this? Because it was like a spam text. So he doesn't understand that kind of stuff. Do you think that that this should be on the parents mostly, or where do you land on that?
Well, I absolutely do think the parents have a gigantic role to play, maybe the biggest role to play when it comes to what their kids are playing. But it's no different now than then. And there's the other disingenuous thing about this, in my opinion, is that Senator Hawley is not that old. It's not like he doesn't know what a video game is or never saw them before, and very likely played it when he was younger.
But his constituents, he's trying to play to his constituents. He's 39 years old. Yeah, he is.
And that bums me out, because to me, that's not being wholly, true in his desire to do something about this. This is less about, like, we're getting to the point where we can't pretend to be naive about this particular form of entertainment any more than people can be naive about movies now, or comic books before this, or anything else that scares the status quo. And so I feel like there's kind of a problem with that going on here that at least should be addressed. But in the case of what's the parent's responsibility, it's the same responsibility it's always been. If it's you film you don't think your kid's ready for, don't take them. If they go do it without your permission, whatever your rules are in your own house for punishment, you kick in and do it. Like, in my opinion, this is no different than it's ever been. And it will always be a bit of a loose requirement, because some parents are going to be very mindful of this and helpful about it, and others aren't. I have my own style of parenting, which is, don't tell your kid not to play Mortal Kombat, play it with him. that's the key. Like I did this with my kids. If they were afraid of something, or if I thought they were too young perhaps for the content, the best way to show them was not having to sneak over at their friends, because now they're really curious, because dad said don't ever play this. Now I have to know what Billy has at his house. It's going to happen. So don't have them do that. Instead, play it with them. Show them what's up. Teach them that, how games work, how narratives work, how make-believe works. Like, there's opportunities there. So if I have parent advice, it's that. The problem with parent advice, it doesn't always line up with regulation or even self-regulation in the case of the games business. So yeah, I don't know that idea will hold much mustard in the long term.
So in the 90s, the games industry developed the ESRB, and they kind of said, okay, we're going to manage ourselves before the government does. And did you get to see what their response was to this yet? The ESRB?
No, I've not looked into what I assume that they were going to weigh in on this, because it makes sense given, who they are. And certainly there are other governing boards in other countries that I have to think have things to say as well.
Yeah.
Like the PEGI system in Europe. And I don't even know the names of them all, but.
Well, the ESRB chimed in and they said numerous countries, including Ireland, Germany, Sweden, Denmark. Sorry, Swedish people. I don't mean to do that. It's just Scott's here. Australia, New Zealand, and the UK determined that loot boxes do not constitute gambling. Now, when I talk about loot boxes, I mean I'm going to pay $1 and I'm going to pull this handle and hopefully something cool pops out. I'm not talking about the resplendent chest at the end of a level in Diablo 3. Hopefully this bill is focused on the actual loot box and not the resplendent chest, because that would be very upsetting.
Yeah.
But the ESRB says we look forward to sharing with the senator the tools and information the industry already provides that keeps control of in-game spending in parents. Parents' hands already.
My biggest problem with their response there is that I don't know if that's I don't know if that will have any. I mean, maybe these things never have any impact, but I don't think the senator's going to give a crap about it. I think he's going to still probably try to push this stuff through. Whether it passes or not is another issue. I actually think it probably won't pass.
Yeah,
is my personal opinion. But that being said, it's not gambling. Like, by any definition, it's not gambling. Now, is it gambling in some of the brain chemicals that pop when you gamble? Maybe. Like that, I'm not arguing. There may be science to say, ooh, I get dopamine every time I successfully get a loot box that opens and gives me some stuff. I'm going to keep spending money to do that. You may be talking about the same general reaction, but you're not actually gambling, because you're not putting money to see if you can get more money from it or see if you can lose money. You're spending a thing on a thing, and then the thing is what the thing is. So when they compare it to gambling, I kind of croak, because I'm just like, really, gambling? Like, that's not gambling.
I don't know. I disagree. I think it is gambling myself. I feel like you're paying for a chance to win something that you want, and there's a chance that you won't win the thing that you want. So to me, that feels like gambling. And so, like, if my son wants to spend money on like his PS4 cash, I tell him he's not allowed to spend it on loot boxes, because he may not get the thing that he wants. He can use it to buy games or a battle pass or something like that, but not on loot boxes, because loot boxes are gambling. And a child's brain is still developing, and they have a gap between the cause and the effect, and they always think that they're going to win. Every single time they think, I'm going to win this time, they can't imagine that they would lose. And it's because their brain hasn't fully developed yet. And when you give them that dopamine, like you mentioned, like that is that has a possibility to create a gambling addict. Because
I completely agree with what you're saying in terms of the effect, and that's why I won't argue that, because absolutely the effect, especially to kids, it's really not all that different. But they have to have a different definition for it, because gambling is, here's money, I'm going to see if that money will double or increase, and I'm going to put it on the table, and then oops, or yay, I did it, I earned an extra $100. Now I'm going to gamble more money and try to earn more money. Or I'm going to shoot, I lost 500. I only came here with 100. I'm $400 down on the deal. I've got no money to get home. Like, that's gambling, because you're gambling with your money. This is more like Magic the Gathering cards. You go to the store, you buy a pack, you paid $5, and you hope some really cool cards are in there. A digital version of that would be Hearthstone. I don't think anybody's arguing that form of buying a thing, hoping there's a thing in it, is gambling by definition. Is it good for our brains or is it good for our kids? I mean, I'll argue no, it's not. And that's why I don't like it. But I think they just, in order for this to be a educated discussion for all parties, including the government, they've got to get their head around what this stuff actually is and classify it as such. Because if we're going to call it gambling, well, then I got bad news for them. There is a lot of stuff in life that is basically gambling, and it's going to affect way more than just anything to do with video games. There are many things that you will purchase something and hope that something came with the thing you purchased. And if it doesn't, you'll wait for the next one. And if that's gambling, then we're all gambling, and there are plenty of state laws that are being violated without us knowing it. So that would be my only worry, because I agree with you about impact, especially for kids, kind of the same. Do I want the government to figure that out? No, because they're bad at this. I would rather see parents and smart industry moves and stuff like that, and not some doofus in Missouri who thinks he knows how this works.
And I have to say that this is funny. I never thought of this until you mentioned Hearthstone. So Hearthstone, I would have absolutely said, yes, that's gambling. But then when you talked about going and buying cards in a store, is that gambling? I would have said no. And I never made the connection that you just said. Like, did you collect baseball cards when you were a kid?
Yeah, I totally did. That was another, it's the form of the exact same thing. It's just a physical version of the digital thing we're talking about now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I never thought of it that way. That's very interesting. We're clearly not going to come down on an answer with just me and Scott. So if you guys haven't tweeted at us, make sure that you do. I'm at Run Jump Stomp. He's at Scott Johnson, and let us know what you think it constitutes gambling. Let's actually shift gears and talk about the State of Play. Did you get a chance to watch the Sony's State of Play yesterday?
I haven't seen the whole thing. I saw chunks of it, and I've been following kind of what's been going on around it. I think that it is fascinating right now to watch Microsoft juxtaposed to Sony and their approaches to what's next. So as a general, just overall sense, the fact that they're not at E3 this year, they're going with this video thing, which arguably Nintendo not popularized, but made work in a way that everybody seems to be doing a form of it. If they're not going to E3, they're doing something like that. That's been really fun to watch kind of as time has gone on. But as far as the specifics, I'm a little behind. I have to say, I haven't watched that video in its entirety.
Well, that's okay. I can tell you some of the things that happened in it. And some of the things I was like, I don't care. And then other things I was very excited about. So have you played Monster Hunter World at all?
I have attempted to play Monster Hunter World, and I don't think it's for me.
Okay, then Monster Hunter World Iceborne, which comes out in June, will not be for you. It was Monster Hunter World in the snow, so it's DLC. There's another game that this one I was very excited to see. And as soon as I heard the sound, I was like, oh my God, like my eyes lit up. And I almost sent my son out of the room because the sound is a very, very specific sound. It was the sound of the predator making a noise. Have you played any of those? There's Dead by Daylight and Friday the 13th. They're like these asymmetrical video games where you got like a monster trying to kill you, and then the other players are trying to get away or kill the monster.
It's Dead by Daylight is the one I spent the most time with, and it's a little harrowing for me, but I get the appeal. They're doing something like that, I take it.
It's called Predator Hunting Grounds. Comes out 2020, which I honestly I don't know why they would tell us about this already in like this soon, but that's okay. But Predator Hunting Grounds, is that something that you would be interested in, or does that kind of gameplay not your jam?
I mean, I like it as a concept. I think that stuff's super cool. I played a lot of Dead by Daylight and did not like it. Not because it's not a good game, but because I was just so stressed out. That game stressed me out bad. And my assumption would be that this would be similar to that, although I'm a fan of the Predator and genres like it, and that would maybe be enough to convince me. There's even there's actually a mission in Ghost Recon Wildlands, which is currently out for all platforms and has been for a couple of years, but it's kind of my favorite open world action game at the moment. And there's actually a mission in there where you fight the Predator. So I'm all in on it as far as a concept, and that does interest me a little bit more. But oh man, they stress me out. And even when I'm the monster, that stresses me out. Like, you're supposed to, play that game as survivors and monsters, and being the monster is supposed to be, I don't know, you're more powerful and you shouldn't be scared, but it still freaks me out. So I'm just kind of a bad horror game guy, I guess is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way.
Now, you've been playing a bunch of horror games lately, haven't you? Is that like a thing that, because you have a sponsor, Doghouse, right? And then they ask you to play scary games on your stream or something?
Well, they never picked the actual games. Where that came from was the community. I have a tendency to turn into a big baby when I play games of that sort, and especially really scary stuff. Like, I thought Resident Evil 7 was just terrifying. The one I played after that, which was I forgot the name of it. It's a sequel. I can't think of the name. Outlast 2. That's what it is. That thing just it makes me scream like a kid. And so I think the chat room gets a kick out of it. So I think that's why they like it. Doghouse is just happy to have me streaming, so they'd take whatever. And right now, I took a bit of a break for a while and played an adventure game on there that I really recommend, by the way, called Unavowed. It's like X-Files meets, I don't know, The Magicians meets, I don't know. It's weird. It's like an old school point and click adventure, but with some modern sensibilities. And it might be my favorite of those games I've ever played. I really liked it.
And what platform was that on? That was PC?
That was on PC, although I believe that might be elsewhere. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I think it might be other places. It's on Steam for relatively cheap. I got it on sale, and I thought, you know what? I'll save this for a rainy day. And I beat Undying or whatever the hell it was, and came back to it and really enjoyed that break. So next up is Resident Evil 2's reboot, and apparently that's going to scare the pants off me. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, like, it seems like I like those, but really that's just for the community. I don't know if I want to do that in my own free time. Like, I'm, playing that with friends for a stream, I would play this Predator game, sure. But if you're asking me what I want to do on a Saturday night when no one else is around, oh man, probably not.
Probably not Predator. And by the way, if you guys don't follow him on Twitch, you should, because when he screams, it's hilarious. And there's lots of clips of him screaming. What's your Twitch page? It's Frog Pants, right?
Frog Pants, twitch.tv/frogpants. They can find it over at frogpants.com as well. And I stream all my podcasts there as well. But when I'm playing, it's like a whole new animal. And but I'd love to have some new folks in there. It's been fun.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go through everything that was in the state of play, but probably the biggest thing, and I got to put this camera lens cap down because I keep dropping it like an idiot. One of the biggest things that happened in the state of play was Final Fantasy VII remake. They made a quick announcement that it's coming. Well, not that it's coming, but we're going to get more news in June. So ostensibly at E3, which is kind of weird because Sony's not going to be there and they're advertising it. I'm sure Sony will still do something around E3. Were you a big fan of Final Fantasy VII or JRPGs in general, Scott?
I like JRPGs. I was not a big fan of Final Fantasy VII or any JRPGs that featured random battles. I hate them. And you might say, well, Scott, that's most of them. And you're right. Historically speaking, random battles where you're just running around outside and boom, you run into a thing is very common, all the way up to Pokemon, although this last Pokemon game didn't feature that, oddly enough. But apparently the next one will again. But I can't stand a game where I'm running and I just suddenly go brrr, and I'm in battle. I hate it. Now, I understand why they do it. It's to grind and get your XP and everything else. But I prefer Western RPGs and the way that they handle that sort of thing. And progression and that kind of thing. So not my bag. Honestly, that's the one mechanic that kept me away for a long time. I'm happy to report, though, these days there are tons of JRPGs with fantastic systems all around and that don't have the dumb random battle system. I get to choose when I want to fight a thing. The first time I remember feeling this way was Super Paper Mario, where I could, not only could I start the fight myself, but if I initiated it correctly, I could actually get a bonus damage on the dude before it even started. And I remember thinking, man, please let all these games just do this, and then I'll play them. And sure enough, many do. Ni no Kuni is a great example I played recently that I love. No random battles in. I'm currently playing the new Dragon Quest. Was it Dragon Quest 11? Whatever it is. 9? I forget the number.
11, yes.
Yeah, 11. I'm popping in and out of that. That is also a much more modern system, so I really dig that. If you told me, and no one said anything about this, so I don't know, I don't know if it's true or whether it would ever happen, but if they said, hey, this Final Fantasy VII remake is going to feature non-randomized encounters, I would be stoked. Because what they showed, I did see that video. That looks amazing. And they really went for it. It reminds me of what Capcom's doing with some of their classic games and bringing them to a modern era. RE2 being one of those. But I'm all in on that look and feel and place and time, and everything about Final Fantasy VII appeals to me except for that stupid mechanic. So we'll see. If that's not in there, I'm in. It's kind of like personalized loot. I just can't go back and play something like Borderlands 2 where I got to fight over loot with my co-op buddies when I know that games like Diablo 3 and Destiny and everything else now features, instanced loot per person. It just can't go back. So for me, that's one of those mechanics, and I just can't do it. So if they can give me that, they got my money.
Oh, I think that you are in for you're going to be happy, because from what I hear, the Final Fantasy VII remake is going to not have the random battles, and not only that, but it's going to be a lot more like Final Fantasy 15. Did you ever play that one?
I did play a bit of 15, and by that I assume they mean the combat's a little more real time. It's not strictly turn based.
Yeah, it looks like an action game.
The trailer they showed yesterday does absolutely suggest that. I think that makes me hopeful, because I do prefer that. Although I like a good, just straight up turn based game. So I don't have so much of a problem with that. But if you're telling me they're eschewing the idea of random battles, you just became my best friend of today.
Of just today, though.
Just today, though. Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, we don't want to go too far.
Right. We just met. So that's that's a really good point. Now, I don't know for sure, but I can't imagine a way for them to have an action combat system with randomized battles. Like, that doesn't really seem to work for me. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I think it's going to be more like Final Fantasy 15, where you can see the enemies that are in the overworld as you fight, and you just fight them in the world the normal way. What do you think about the idea that they're taking the game and they're breaking it into segments? So it's quote unquote episodic. They're breaking it into 3 games.
There would have been a time where you would have told me that, and I would have been frustrated. Because I don't like the idea of piecemealing out my stuff, but I feel like Hitman turned me on that. The recent 2016 Hitman, and now the new one, in 2016 in particular, that thing was given to players in chunks, and the game is structured in chunks too, so maybe that helped. But what it taught me was that, oh, you know what, episodic can be done right. It's not just waiting for something and then being kind of like, well, this is sort of the same stuff you already gave me. Like, they were legit giving me better and better things, and it felt good at the rate they were giving it to me, and they stuck to their commitments. I'm softer on that now. I used to think that was a bad idea. It's been blown a lot of times. Valve never really delivered on what they were doing with Half-Life and its episodes. In fact, they really just cut it short. They stopped with episode 2 and just never made another one.
Why you got to bring that up, man?
I know,
that's
it sucked.
Just mean.
It was such a bummer, and to see that being done right is hopeful to me. So I have, I have faith they can pull this one off, and I'd be all right with it. These are huge, enormous pieces of gameplay, these Final Fantasy games, all of them are. And the fact that they feel that they need to chunk it up like that, I think is probably okay. I mean, also there's going to be people who just wait till the whole thing's out and they buy the bundle, and that's fine too. So yeah, I guess in this case, I don't really have a problem with it.
I think that you and I kind of see eye to eye. I don't mind the random battles, but I like the idea that the game is going to have a different combat system than the original. I know a lot of people are upset about that. They want it to have the same combat system as the original, and I say just go play the original then. And then, I also don't mind the idea of it coming out in an episodic way, but I think for a different reason. I think for me, mostly because I think, dear God, I might actually finish a game. So I never finish games. Like I constantly, I see something shiny, I'm like, oh my God, look at that shiny thing. I'm gonna go play that instead, and I'll come back to you in a second. And then I never come back to that game, or if I do, I'm so lost that I'm like, what the hell was I doing? I guess I got to start over, and now I'm not going to finish it because I got to start all the way at the beginning. So if they're going to break up Final Fantasy VII Remake into sections, that's like saying, hey, Bill, we know that your attention span is terrible. So we're going to split this up for you. You can play a little bit of it. And then when the next one comes out, you can play a little bit of that too. And I think that for me, it's like they're taking a burden off me of, here's this 200-hour RPG, go. To me, that's like, oh, that's overwhelming, and I never get through it. Although I have no problem putting hundreds and hundreds of hours into an MMO. I don't know what the difference is, but single player games tend to not hold my attention for long enough for me to get all the way through it. That's just me, though. I don't know.
I feel like that you and I are similar in that regard. I do the same thing. My backlog is ridiculous. I do, like, once in a while, I'll be like, hey, that thing I bought in 2015 is still in my library. I should play that. And then finding out how great it was, and I totally missed out by not finishing it. So there are cases where it's fine and it sort of pays off, but I totally agree with you. And that helped me in particular with the Hitman game. I felt like that Hitman game was way more for me to play because it knew that I needed a break or something. It's hard to explain, and they would hype me up again. I'd hear, oh, the new part's coming out. Sweet. I forgot that was happening. And I'd get all hyped, all new. So yeah, I think I agree with you on that point, and would probably welcome it. Now, I'll say this about people who want the old combat system. They always say blood is thicker than, what does it go? Blood's thicker than wine. Is that the phrase?
Blood is thicker than water.
Well, water. I'll tell you what's thicker than blood: nostalgia. What you ought to do is go back and play the old one on your PlayStation 1 and then tell me how you feel. Because I don't think that thing holds up at all, and on lots of levels. And it was great at its day, like lots of things are. But man, rough business now. So they've always got that. They can go back and soak in that all they want. This new thing may not be for them exactly, but I think it is definitely going to be more for me than it ever was before.
Awesome. So we talked about the game industry as a whole. We talked about PlayStation. Before we talk about Microsoft, they're going to take a quick commercial break. Stick around. Oh, that was the wrong button. Let's try that again.
Frogger, Sega's arcade game, now a home video game from Parker Brothers, the ones to beat.
Oh my goodness, Microsoft has Microsoft is doing some really good things lately. I have to say, like, they did the whole thing where they've got the adaptive controller with the two giant circles, and I'm kind of curious as to how that thing works, because I see it and I'm like, I want to push those buttons and see what happens. But they just filed a patent for a video game that has haptic braille, or not a video game accessory for Xbox controllers that has haptic braille built into it. What do you think about Microsoft doing this kind of stuff? It sounds great to me.
Yeah, I'm all in on it. They won some awards, I think last year and this year at GDC for accessibility. I think that this is one of my favorite initiatives Microsoft is actually up to. And it's a market that wants to play games. So why are we making it harder for them to do that? I think Microsoft should be commended for this. And I hope they continue to do these sorts of initiatives. All of that being said, I too am very curious to mess around with these controllers. I mean, I wouldn't know what to do with the Braille one because I don't know Braille at all and don't need to. But I have in particular, I have a friend who was blind since childhood who is stoked about this. He's so excited. He barely can stand it. And what we forget is that there are games and experiences you can have that don't require your eyesight. I mean, there's things to be made in places that we just haven't thought of. And Microsoft is absolutely leading the way in this regard. Sony's not doing any of this sort of thing right now.
Neither is Nintendo.
Or Nintendo, yeah, for that matter. So I think that this is great, and I hope others follow it. I really don't have a bad thing to say about it, because honestly, it's like they don't have to do it. It's not a major market niche that Microsoft would normally want to try to go after or dominate. It doesn't feel like this is about money as much as it is about inclusion, which just naturally means more people are on your platform. So I commend them.
Yeah, I think it's awesome as well. But as far as Sony and Nintendo not doing this kind of thing, I wish that they would either just copy and I don't know if they can. Microsoft might look like the bad guy if Nintendo or Sony tried to make an adaptive controller and they said, no, we patented that. Like that would turn into them being a bad guy. But I want Nintendo and PlayStation and somebody for computers to just copy what Microsoft is doing and bring it to your platform as well, because there's no reason at all for Nintendo and PlayStation or Sony not to be working on this. I know it's not a huge market like you said, but it just seems kind of, I don't know, ass backwards that they're just letting Microsoft run away with this. Or maybe it's because Microsoft, they did all this work, and then once it was done, they were like, here it is. And they kind of caught everybody else flat-footed, and they just haven't had a chance to respond yet.
I think that's part of it. There's certainly time for that. I just think it's important for entities with the most power in the industry, and therefore the most responsibility, you could argue, do stuff like this. And it's not to say that Sony and Nintendo don't have other initiatives that aren't great in whatever ways, but Microsoft's definitely taking the wheel on this one, and it's going to be fun to see what that translates to in real time. Like, my daughter works at the university, and they have one of these up there, and they have kids with various disabilities and students that love it. In fact, they have an entire semester at the school in this game development school that they have up there now, where the focus is non-traditional input method. And so they're literally making game experiences that would better take advantage of not only that controller, but things like people just using body movement or other alternate methods of input that aren't a controller with a bunch of buttons or a keyboard and mouse. And so in a lot of ways, I think this inspires more of that. That can inspire more gameplay design choices that can translate well to folks who would be considered disabled in this regard. Like, it's a good thing to be doing. And I kind of hope everybody else follows suit. But, they're also leaders in the industry, and they need to be thinking of these sorts of things. So I'm always happy when companies do that when they don't have to.
Well, you bring up Microsoft being a leader in the industry, and it looks like they are trying to lead the charge in having gamers clean up their act. They released these new community standards over at Xbox.com, and they get into this whole thing about knowing the difference between trash talk and harassment. And I think that this is a really good thing for Microsoft to do. Their examples are ridiculous. So I'm gonna say one of their examples, and I want to hear what your reaction is if you had been trash talked like this before. You ready?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Get destroyed. Can't believe you thought you were on my level. That was some potato aim. Get wrecked. Anybody ever said these things to you?
No. Well, I mean, in all fairness, I avoid Xbox Live like the plague I think it is. So I'm happy to play games on the service. I never, ever have headset stuff on in randos, ever. Like, that's a decision I made back when this was first being experimented with, late in the PS2 sort of, late Xbox original stage of things. And I learned very quickly that, some of the worst of people's behaviors and the worst of humanity will show up here. That includes all my PC play. I learned a long time ago playing competitive Quake that you do not want to be talking to people over IP, even in those weird heady days when we were playing on dial-up. So I'm kind of more of a fan of, I don't want to do that unless it's my friends and my crew anyway. So I'm already avoid it. But so maybe somebody would have said, that's some real potato aim to me. I don't know. Clearly this is being read and written by people who talk to somebody who knows some of these terms, and then somebody in this board meeting said, well, we got to water that down a little bit to be a little less offensive, so let's come up with a few that are, like get wrecked. My son is always saying get wrecked.
Yeah, my son says that too.
Yeah, so it's coming off as super cheeseball, and
well,
like your parents are telling you
that's acceptable trash talk, according to Microsoft.
Right. Well, not only that, but they're the way they're saying it. It's like somebody, the secretary in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, going, "Oh, that Ferris Bueller, he's a radical dude," or whatever. Like it doesn't sound right with them saying it. However, I like the intent behind it. As, there's nothing wrong with once in a while reinforcing the kind of standards you hope for and expect on your service. Probably what it does more than anything is drive people to be louder and more obnoxious. I mean, I've learned in my podcasting years, the minute I say, all right, let's try to keep it clean, it stops, that's when people get tempted not to do that. So I understand the psychology of it, but there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with having standards and trying to have your base live up to them. The internet's hard. You can't really wrangle it very easily, but, Tom Merritt always says you get the chat room you deserve. I believe that. So for those of us who are out there trying to be positive voices in this space, I think we can help that too. But my big answer is, if you're playing with randos, just don't have your headsets on. Don't talk to them. Turn that all off. Mute it. All these games support muting it now. You don't want to play Overwatch with a bunch of idiots. Just play with them. Pretend they're robots. Do the best you can. Be a good teammate. Give your commendations. But at the end of the day, you probably don't need to be talking to them. And if it's friends of yours, absolutely talk to them. That's what it's for.
And trash talk them.
Yeah, that's fine, because you're friends. You understand what's going on. And I do that all the time with my friends. I have a group of friends I play all the time with, various competitive games, and we give each other all kinds of crap over audio, over comms. But that's because we know each other and we're friends and we know what our limits are. If you start doing that with some rando, then you're either just mean and a bully, or the other person is just in a bad state to be able to take that kind of harassment, and they're young. So we're back to the whole, what can their brains even process at that point? Mm-hmm. Just stay away from that part of it. And if you're a parent, just say, look, play with your friends, but if it's not your friends, don't have your headset on. And if your kid rebels, he'll figure it out on his own. It'll be fine.
All right. So before we get out of here, we got some feedback. I got a tweet from Leo Stern. They said, do you ever look at Metacritic game reviews? Do you have any review sites that you trust or don't trust? It seems to me that game reviews are harsher this year than last, with the high score of only an 87 on several games I enjoyed scoring in the 70s. So, what do you think about Metacritic, Scott?
I don't like how it's become a metric for developers and publishers to rely on for what they think their game is going to sell. Because what that leads to is them, I mean, maybe we're seeing this turn, but in the past, and it's gotten kind of bad, where they'll pay a YouTuber to talk about this game in a positive way and not disclose on any level that they were paid to do it. That's on the YouTuber and the publisher. And the goal there is like, well, if we do that with reviewers, we get better review scores, we get a better Metacritic score, and people just automatically buy it if it's a 90. You hear stories about that all the time. I think that's a problem. I'm a little out of my lane when I talk about it, because I don't know exactly how it works internally at these companies when they see those scores and what they try to do to curb that. However, there are some sites I always rely on, and I'm also a big believer that critical reviews being coagulated into a single average score is very useful. So I like Rotten Tomatoes for that. I like Metacritic for that. I don't like the user reviews on either of those sites. And I certainly don't like Steam reviews, because they get manipulated. They get review bombed. They get negatively impacted for no reason, or somebody gets a hair up their butt and they follow some YouTuber who's all angry about a certain aspect of a game, maybe it had, I don't know, like a lesbian in it. Oh no, the social justice warriors are coming out of their closet, and they start review bombing him, trying to put it in negative hell. I don't think it should be used that way. Everyone should have their opinion. You all should be able to say it, but I don't think you should be able to manipulate a market like that, or potentially manipulate it. So my thing is, if I go to Metacritic, it's to get an overall. If I want to get real specific and decide if it's worth my $60, I'll go to specific sites and check reviews from people I trust and know. Also talk to friends who play. That's a big part of it for me. And then thirdly, I will go to Metacritic when I want to read really funny, bad user reviews from people who should never be allowed to type, because some of them are freaking hilarious. Like, I want to animate them. I want to do like a whole YouTube channel that's just nothing but animated versions of these horrendously written, awful, misspelled, horribly punctuated, nonsensical reviews. So part of me likes that, if I'm being honest, but I don't trust any of it. Like, not as far as I could throw it. It's ridiculous, that stuff. It's so bad. So user reviews, this idea that the wisdom of crowds, I no longer think that that's cool. I used to think that was a thing, and I used to think, yeah, that's right. The wisdom of crowds, the larger part is where the brain trust is, and whatever we decide as a crowd, that'll be it. I don't think that works. I think Twitter's a great example of how that's messed up right now. I think there's so many competing voices trying to get you to buy into their garbage on all levels of everything. And this isn't a complaint. I think this is just the way it is, and I'm happy to accept it as part of the deal to have a free and open internet. I don't want someone to control it, so don't get me wrong here. But all of that stuff has proven that the crowds are kind of bastards collectively and individually sometimes. And I don't believe any of them. So I tend to keep my circle of information a little smaller, trusting certain voices over others, build those relationships or that trust over time. And that's how I make my gaming decisions. I can't do it based on a score. It's got to be a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people focus entirely on the score. Like, this is the score, so like the 76 is worse than the 78, and that doesn't make any sense to me. I think that you got to find a reviewer. Don't look for a site that you like. I think you got to find a reviewer that you tend to agree with most of the time, and you have to actually read their reviews. And I like that you said the wisdom of crowds doesn't really work. It worked really well until the crowd got organized. As soon as the crowd got organized and they figured out, hey, we're pretty powerful now that we're organized. Let's start kicking some cans around. And that's when things go off the rails. And I did a whole episode about review bombing a few episodes back, so make sure that you go back and listen to that if you haven't, guys. But I'm with you on that, Scott.
Yeah, it's kind of like I don't know. Some would say it's free and open expression, and I guess it is. If the platforms give you the option to review bomb, if Steam doesn't control it that much, they may be able to tell you, ooh, there's a weird jump in reviews and we don't know why, and that's all they're doing. Then I guess that's the platform, and you use it however you want to use it. But I can't trust it, is the point. So all I'm saying is, use your head. Don't make rash decisions like anything in life, but even with video games. If you see a headline that's just clearly meant to get you riled up, stop for a minute, think about it, look around, check more of your trusted sources, and you'll probably find that things are a little closer to the ground than you think. So, it's just, for me, it's just this human inclination to jump to conclusions. We got to get better at slowing down and not doing that. And sadly, or good, I guess, it depends how you look at it, gaming is there. That's where we're at with gaming. It's big enough. This is large enough and a big enough part of society now that we can't just treat it like this weird underground offshoot hobby. It's more mainstream than it's ever been and makes more money than any other mainstream form of entertainment. So we just need to get better at navigating it. And that part of that is going to be drowning out the voices we know are just there to make a buck or to screw us over or to mislead us.
What a perfect, he just completely encapsulated the entire episode in that last sentence. So are you ready to wrap this up, man?
I am. I've been having a blast, so I sort of am. I've kind of been enjoying it, but I guess I'm okay to get wrapping it up, sure.
All right, let's hit the outro real quick.
I'm a coming, Luigi!
Become a part of the community over at runjumpstomp.com/Discord. You can watch the show live over at twitch.tv/runjumpstomp. You can get a hold of me on Twitter at runjumpstomp. And I have a bunch of different podcasts, so use the hashtag RJSPOD because it makes it easy for me to sort what your comment is about. Scott, where can people find all of your stuff?
Well, if you're looking for my shows and anything connected to them, you can go to frogpants.com. There's an entire grouping of podcasts that I do with myself and other co-hosts and a few shows that are just friends of the show. You can check that out as well. All the artwork I talked about is all happening there as well. You can see all my latest stuff. And if you're looking to grab me online and talk to me in real time, Twitter's also a great place, and I respond to most everybody. You can go to @ScottJohnson.
Awesome. If you are looking for ways to support this show, you can do so by heading on over to runjumpstomp.com/thank-you for more content like this. Check out my other shows at runjumpstomp.com/shows. The music that you are about to hear right now is Through a Cardboard World by Tony Lays. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.